Prologue. I once visited an old fortress in Portugal in the city of Elvas. It's one of the best examples of the trace Italian style of massive post-gunpowder star fortresses in the world. Looking up, I noticed a bird's nest in the muzzle of one of the old cannons and thought about how ironic it would be to have your secure home suddenly become the mouth of an angry weapon. I stored that image in my mind where one day it would be remembered with clarity. My name is Dave Brown, and when these events occurred, I was a 42-year-old contract engineering consultant running a very steady business from my home. My wife, Maria, was 44 years old and working as a paralegal at her brother's law firm, a short distance from our home in a semi-rural area of Prather County, Texas. We had 2 children, 20-year-old fraternal twins, Andrew and Andrea, known as Drew and Andi, who attended my alma mater about 2 hours from here. Unlike most of these stories, I'm not a former Navy SEAL, and Maria wasn't one of those women who retained her supermodel looks, despite having 2 children. I stay pretty fit by running a mile a day and eating well, but it's mostly my genetics that keeps me healthy and reasonably fit. When these events occurred, I was 6'1", 188 pounds with a bit of gray in my dark brown hair. Maria was 5'7" and around 150 pounds, about 20 pounds heavier than when we married, with much of that in her nice round behind. While Maria was a bit thick in the middle, I loved her curvy, voluptuous shape as much as she disliked it. Her coal-black hair had no gray in it, and it shined almost blue in the sunlight. Her dark brown eyes were piercing and intense and could cut through me like a hot knife through butter, both during the good times and when I was in trouble with her. Even after being married 21 years, our intimate life was still pretty good, but it had decreased to just once or twice a week in the month or so before things went wrong. I finished my engineering degree 2 semesters behind schedule, so we lived with my parents in the house where Maria and I eventually raised our children. In effect, we moved in, had the twins, and never left. My parents renovated the home, originally built in 1935, after they inherited it from my mother's uncle, Bill. Soon after I graduated, I went to work for a local manufacturing company. 6 of us lived comfortably in the house until Dad, also an engineer, was offered a job in Pittsburgh. Mother, the actual homeowner, leased it to us for $1 a year, as long as we paid all taxes, insurance, and upkeep. That unexpected blessing, along with a good salary, allowed Maria to be a stay-at-home mother. When the twins were in the 3rd grade, Maria's brother, Robert, hired her part-time in his law office. We also agreed that she would become a paralegal, and I was happy to do what I needed to help earn her certification. After all, Maria gave up college and helped me complete my engineering degree and raise our small children. That's when I started my own home-based consulting business, which did well from the start. Life was great. Many nights we sat on the long, covered front porch of that old home and planned our future. It was there on those quiet evenings that we forged our hopes, dreams, and goals. It is where we turned them into reality, using the strong bonds of love, trust, and understanding. Together, Maria and I maintained a vegetable garden, grew flowers, and enjoyed cooking. We also continued working on that old house, with most of the effort being routine and preventative maintenance. We had so much in common that it was natural to become secure and comfortable. When the children were around 12, the natural gas utility laid a line along the county road, and we connected to it, which eliminated our huge propane tank and the higher cost of LP gas from our budget. Most of the cost was tapping into the main supply line, laying the service line to our home, and connecting it for use. I had a plumber examine the original house piping, which was in good shape, but Maria asked for an additional water heater. So we upgraded the older unit, located in the basement, and added a newer one in the attic. Part of that upgrade was a new gas supply line that ran from the meter side of the home to the water heater. At the other end of the basement, it ran across the ceiling joists and dropped to the water heater connected with a ball valve and flexible pipe. Life on the edge of the rural countryside was good, and life settled into a comfortable, predictable pattern. There were ups and downs, minor disagreements, and all the other conflicts any marriage encounters. We always managed to discuss them and relied on our supportive family network when we needed it. But most importantly, we had love, the glue that held us together. Life changes Maria started to change in the late fall and winter after the twins left home for university. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and when I asked her, she simply blamed it on the kids being gone. Since I worked from home, their absence seemed to affect me more because since Maria had gone back to work, I took care of their morning and after-school needs. When I had to travel for work, Maria adjusted her schedule or called one of our family members or neighbors for help. Either way, I wasn't about to argue about who missed the kids more, but I seemed to handle it better. During the dark, gloomy days of winter, Maria became more distant and even angry. She started finding fault over small things, and it seemed like anything could set her off. There was no apparent reason for her outbursts. After a particularly bad fight, I confronted her, and Maria stormed out of the house, not returning until well past midnight. After that incident, I asked Robert, her brother and boss, to talk to her. He and our mother, Beatrice, staged some kind of intervention after work one day, and the result was Maria telling them to stay out of her life before shockingly resigning from her job. The following days were terrible at the Brown home. Beatrice tried to get my wife to see her OB-GYN or family doctor, suspecting that Maria may be having hormone problems. That seemed to anger Maria even more, and she directed her frustration towards all of us. In Maria's mind, life was miserable, she was bored, and our family, except for Drew and I, were part of the issue. Christmas and New Year passed uncomfortably, and both kids were as upset as the rest of us, but they tried not to take sides. When they were alone with their mother, Drew and Andy said she was still tense, but in every other way, she was the mother they had always known. Andy tried to discuss the tension between her mother and me, but Maria told her it wasn't any of her business. Shortly after Christmas, Maria left the house one morning in her work clothes, and when I asked her where she was going, she simply looked at me and said, out. Andy followed her to the garage and questioned her about what she was doing, only to be told, "I'm doing something for myself." Later that day, I found out from Andy that Maria went on a job interview with another law firm and was immediately hired as a paralegal and personal assistant to one of the partners. When I asked her about it, she just nodded and said, "Now, I'm not working somewhere simply because I'm family." "Maria, I don't think Robert hired you for that reason." "You're good at your job, honey," I gently reassured her. To my surprise, she gave me a warm hug. "Thanks, Dave, that was the first one since after Christmas Eve Mass." "Oh, we're invited to the law firm's New Year's Eve party. It'll be like a get-to-know-you event for me." I didn't bring up her family's New Year's Eve party, which was a yearly tradition for us. Instead, I decided to go along with it and see where it led. After all, I thought, this was the most civil we had been since she unilaterally declared a Christmas truce. When we arrived at the small banquet hall for the Baker, Long and Flanagan Law Firm's New Year's Eve party, the office manager, a woman named Peggy Leeson, introduced Maria and me to the other attendees. It was a typical event with a rented venue, catering, an open bar, and an average DJ. During dinner, we were seated with 3 other couples, and I immediately noticed that everyone was drinking heavily. As far as New Year's Eve parties go, this one was pretty ordinary. Maria seemed to be her old self, and we mingled well with the other couples and some singles. I met all 3 partners, and they seemed to be friendly individuals. There was no inappropriate behavior that I could detect, so this party had no significant impact on future events. For me, it simply allowed me to put a name and face together, which I would see soon enough under very different circumstances. Unlike Maria's 2-day Christmas truce, this period of domestic peace lasted until I shifted the car into drive as we left the party venue. I placed my hand on my wife's leg, and she roughly pushed it away. "Maybe if you hadn't been constantly hovering over me all night, I might be in the mood." "Seriously, you were like my chaperone. Dave, I didn't know any of these people. What did you expect me to do?" I asked. With a stern look, she replied, "I don't know. You're an adult. Maybe you should have gone to Mom's party and let me meet these people on my own, really, honey. Go to your family's New Year's Eve party without you?" I questioned. She shrugged and sullenly looked out the window, signaling that the conversation was over. Even though Maria started her new job on the 2nd, she continued to be moody and withdrawn. In the first few days, she didn't even acknowledge that dinner was ready when she came home, and Drew eventually called her out on it. Andy attempted to convince Maria to see a doctor about her mood swings but was treated as badly as anyone else. Robert informed me that Beatrice met with Maria for lunch the following Friday, and their mother left in tears. The fact that Drew and Andy returned to school 3 days early indicated how tense things were in the Brown household that early January. The talk towards the end of January, I was doing my usual checks on the basement water heater, central heating unit, and just making sure everything was in order. This included looking for any leaks and inspecting the plumbing and wiring. I noticed the light from the kitchen door and saw Maria standing at the top of the basement stairs. She had her arms crossed and a serious look on her face, as if she was about to start one of our frequent arguments. "Dave, we need to talk," she said. Without waiting for a response, she turned and headed towards the family room. I followed her and saw that she was sitting in one of the big comfortable chairs, looking stern. "Sit down." "I have something important to tell you," she said coldly. She was still wearing her office clothes. I was worried because there was something different about her eyes. But I was also bracing myself for another one of our arguments. I never could have anticipated what she was about to say. "Honey, I don't know how else to say this, but I'm really unhappy with my life. It's become boring and dull, and I feel like I'm missing out on so much. And you, Dave, are a big part of why I feel this way." "What? Honey, you please, Dave." "Let me explain." Without interrupting, she interrupted. "I'm tired of feeling dissatisfied and unfulfilled. So I've developed a connection with my new boss, and we have been spending time together for the past couple of weeks. There's a certain chemistry between us that we can't ignore anymore. Brent is picking me up in an hour for a date, and I might not be back until tomorrow or even Sunday." I was furious and couldn't hold back my anger. "What? No way," I yelled. "Why would you think I would accept this? Have you lost your mind, Maria?" "Dave, please try to understand. I haven't been happy for a while now. Maybe it's just an adjustment issue after the kids moved out, but I need this for my own well-being. Let me explore and have some fun. I love you and want to spend my life with you, but this thing with Brent is just a physical attraction, nothing more. Maria, how could you think I would be okay with this? Did our wedding vows mean nothing to you?" She looked at me like I was crazy. "I love you, Maria, and I won't tolerate infidelity." Maria laughed. "Oh, Dave, that's just your ego talking. Baby, I love you, but right now I need a change of pace. It's just about having some fun before we get older." I stood up abruptly, and Maria warned, "Stop. Don't you come any closer to me." "What?" I asked, confused. "I'm really angry right now, Maria. I mean, what do you want me to do? Should I agree to let you be with someone else? Because that's never going to happen, Dave. I mean it. I don't like the way you're standing there. Back off." She hissed. Uncertain about her behavior, I walked over and sat on the stairs. "Look, if you go through with this, our marriage is over. Instead of ruining everything, let's go to marriage counseling or take a vacation, please. This isn't about us, Dave. It's about me and my happiness. I love you more than anything, but right now I need a break from us, honey. You mean everything to me, and that's why I can't just let you do this. Our marriage is at stake, and I won't let you cheat on me. It's not about love. I know what I'm doing. Now, leave the stairs. You can't stop me from going to our bedroom." Maria's tone was stern and serious. She walked past me and warned, "Don't you raise your hand as if you're going to hurt me." Surprised, I raised my voice. "Maria, I would never," but she interrupted me. "Stay back, Dave. I'm warning you." She quickly disappeared upstairs into our bedroom. "What just happened?" I said loudly enough for her to hear upstairs. "I would never hurt you, and you know that." For at least 20 minutes, I sat on the stairs, trying to wrap my head around what I should do. Just as I was thinking, Maria appeared, looking stunning in a little black dress that showcased her legs and accentuated her curvy figure. She wore 3 heels that she had bought for New Year's Eve the previous year and only wore on that special occasion. She also had a small overnight bag in her hand. Anxiously, I pleaded, "Please, Maria, I'm begging you not to do this. Please reconsider." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Maria looked at me with a cold smile. Her mouth was warm and grinning, but her eyes were cold and heartless. She opened the door, revealing a tall man in an overcoat and fancy suit. He stood at least 6'4" and weighed around 220 pounds. He had reddish blonde hair and blue eyes, and I guessed he was in his late 30s or early 40s. As if I didn't exist, he leaned down to give my wife a hug. "Hi, baby," he said. "You look absolutely amazing." They both laughed. "Hey, that's my wife. Get out of my house, or I'll make you leave," I shouted, seething with anger. I walked up and grabbed my wife's wrist. "Let her go, Dave," she commanded, twisting out of my grip. The man stepped between us. "Leave her alone, Dave," he warned, smirking. "You've got some nerve," I spat. He turned to Maria and calmly asked, "Has he always been like this?" "Yes, he has, Brent." "Only since I told him about us," Maria answered seriously. "I know you only met Dave at the party, but this isn't how he normally behaves." It dawned on me that this man was Maria's new boss, Brent Flanagan. He was one of the partners at the law firm where she worked. When I saw the look they exchanged, I felt like a bird who had made its nest in the mouth of a cannon. Things were about to get serious, and I had no idea how much and from where. Turning back to me, Brent said, "Maria is coming with me, and you can't stop her. You have no legal right to hold her against her will, as you just tried to. Of course, you have the right to file for divorce. That's within your legal rights. But be warned, if you choose that path, my law firm will happily bankrupt you with legal fees. Right now, your loving wife, who is also a dear friend and valued colleague of mine, needs a break from the unhappy and stressful routine of her marriage. Frankly, so do I. So we are taking this break together." They exchanged warm smiles. Flanagan added, "For as long as this continues between Maria and me, you need to calm down and be the hard-working, kind, and loving husband that Maria always speaks highly of. And don't think for a second that Maria or I want to end our marriages. It's purely a physical attraction." They both chuckled. "Don't worry, Dave. This won't be an everyday occurrence, and I'm sure Maria will still take care of you." He turned to my wife. "Won't you, darling?" Maria giggled and looked up playfully at Brent. "Of course I will, Brent," and I tried to explain to him this is just a special connection. "What I have with my husband is true love." She smiled at me. "Isn't it? Dave, you have a messed up way of showing it." I responded angrily. Brent turned back to me with a smirk and said firmly, "Now, Dave, calm down and don't do anything foolish that you'll regret. I'll have her home tomorrow afternoon or Sunday at the latest, in the same state she is now. Well, almost the same." They both laughed. He helped her into the expensive suede coat I'd given her for Christmas. Arm in arm, they walked down the steps together and out of the porch light. I stepped outside and stood there stunned, nauseated and trembling. Anger, jealousy, hurt, and fear seethed through me. I heard a high-performance engine growl into life, and some European sports car shot out from the blind spot behind the tall hedge at the corner of the yard. I called Robert and told him what happened. He said, "Don't do anything. Dave, I'll be there in half an hour." When my brother-in-law arrived, I was still sitting on the porch in the late January cold, clad only in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved flannel shirt. "Come on, Dave, let's get you inside," Robert said, helping me stand. After pouring me a strong double bourbon, Robert asked me to describe everything in as much detail as I could recall, and he captured it all on a small digital recorder. Due to the shocking nature of it all, I could relate events in explicit detail. Most puzzling were Maria's exaggerated reactions whenever I was angry. I remembered that Flanagan reacted similarly, too. Robert confirmed that neither I nor any other man had the legal right to stop their wife from walking out of the marital home on a date. Furthermore, even though this home was my sole legal property, Maria had a right to return until she was legally evicted from the home. "So what about when I grabbed her wrist to try and keep her from going?" I asked, half afraid of the answer. Robert shook his head. "You can't do that. It could be seen as domestic violence, especially with a witness like Flanagan. Look, it was just a reaction, and she twisted right out of my grip." Robert nodded sympathetically. "Don't worry about it. What's done is done. Legally, she could file assault or even domestic assault charges on you, damn." "I can't believe this," I said, defeated. It was as if my heart was being torn from my chest, and I felt tears welling up again. "What can I do, Robert?" "Legally? About all you can do is divorce her. Texas still allows filing on the grounds of adultery, which often impacts property division and spousal support. Of course, the court can order counseling, so you'd at least get her in front of a mental health professional of sorts. Heck, Mama can't even get her to keep her doctor appointments to check on her hormones." I wiped my eyes with the flannel sleeves. "Man, I still love her. I can't throw away all these years, and she's using that against me." "Maybe it is depression or hormones or a combination," my brother-in-law said. "I'd play it by ear for a few days and see if she realizes how badly she messed up." "I don't know," I said. "You didn't see her, man. It was like she was possessed. The look she gave me when she answered the door was evil. Then, her attitude, the way she hugged him in front of me. They were out for revenge the way they did this. Heck, she could have said, "I'm going to be with my boss and live with him," and drive off to his place. But he came to my front door like it was a high school date. My pulse was pounding in my ears. "Well, look who he is, Dave. His old man is B. Alton Flanagan. This guy thinks he can do anything and get away with it, and he probably can," Robert explained. "They just started up this law firm about a year ago, but Flanagan SR is making it rain for Junior. They're nearly out-earning us, from what I hear, and we've been around for a while." I can't even imagine, Dave. "But the woman doing this isn't my little sister, man. It's not. And you know it then," he asked. When Flanagan mentioned his marriage, that's all he said. That he was taking a break too. That's it. The more I think about it, the more I wonder if this is just a fling or a full-blown affair. I wonder if he threatened his wife with financial ruin by law firm if she caused any trouble. It doesn't make sense. The problem with what Flanagan said is that both you and Mrs. Flanagan can use marital funds to pay an attorney. Maybe it was all talk. Or maybe he's willing to destroy everyone's lives if you or his wife speak out, Robert wondered. We talked about it extensively, and ultimately I chose to hope for the best, which may have been naive, but at that point, what did I know? Maybe Maria was dealing with mental health issues. Maybe she was just acting maliciously. For now, I decided to wait and see. Looking back, I think both Robert and I believed the real Maria Brown would emerge eventually, and we could work through all our problems. After Robert left, I went into my home office and laid down on the futon, but I was foolish to think that sleep would come easily. My mind replayed the images of Maria, me, and Brad Flanagan, complete with the humiliating, gut-wrenching feelings, the vision of Maria dressed as she was. In my imagination, I saw her beautiful legs wrapped around a sweating Flanagan. I pictured him aggressively with my beautiful wife and then looking up at me with that smirk. After taking a sleep aid at 2 a.m., I fell into a troubled sleep. Waking up around 9 a.m., I forced down a piece of toast with butter and grape jelly and drank hot coffee. The day was cold, gray, and threatened sleet, reflecting my mood. Maria's mom called me around 10 o'clock and said she had been trying to reach her daughter since the night before. "Dave, we know this isn't the real Maria. I'll bring her back to reality, and she'll start being a good wife to you again," she said, her voice anxious and full of tension. In the end, I was the one comforting Beatrice. Robert called and told me he had brought in one of his law partners, Bethany Robinson, a family law specialist. She advised me to start separating our finances on Monday, but as soon as I hung up, I began that process as much as I could online on a Saturday. I called 2 of the credit card companies, both with no outstanding balances, and canceled them. I printed out all the necessary documents to change beneficiaries on insurance policies and investments. I took those papers to Robert's house, where his wife, Sandra, also a paralegal at his firm, notarized them. At the FedEx agency, I prepared the paperwork for a Monday morning delivery. Then, the waiting began. When your wife is on an overnight outing with her boss, your mind tends to dwell on the misery. With no concrete information, my imagination started to run wild, creating a worst-case scenario. I had to do something, so I started researching Brent Flanagan. I confirmed he was B. Alton Flanagan's namesake and possibly trying to follow in his father's footsteps. After searching the internet and public records, I also discovered that Brent Flanagan was married to Tanya Barrett Flanagan. Seeing the hyphen, I visualized a strong, independent woman, but I knew that was unfair. She was in the same situation as me. What I couldn't find was her phone number. I had dinner at Robert and Sandra's on Saturday, and nobody was at ease with the elephant in the room. Like us, 2 of their children were away at college, and their oldest son was on active duty with the Marine Corps, somewhere at sea in the Indian Ocean. The conversation was tense, and the movie we watched served mainly as a distraction from an uncomfortable conversation. Unable to sleep, I decided to check on the hot water heater in the basement again, where I had noticed some pipe corrosion. Upon closer inspection, I found that the gas supply line installed during the switch from LP gas to natural gas had a couple of issues. One problem was pipe corrosion, and the other was that the pipe coming from the inline ball valve had been improperly installed and weakened by corrosion. I shut off the gas supply at the ball valve and planned to deal with the repairs the following week. I also needed to find the small water leak in the basement wall, or plumbing that was causing the corrosion. I made a mental note to call a plumber to fix the entire line. Working on some of my consulting projects also occupied my mind, and before I knew it, it was almost 4 a.m. I slept fitfully for about 4 hours and had another light breakfast. When I heard the key in the front door, it was 2:33, Sunday afternoon. Maria entered wearing jeans, a designer pullover top, sneakers, and her tweed coat. She had on minimal makeup, and her hair was wrapped in a towel. Without saying a word, she walked past me and went straight upstairs to our bedroom. Was I surprised? Truthfully, yes. Mostly it was the bold, almost arrogant way Maria returned home that bothered me. Was I shocked? No, because nothing my wife did would ever surprise me again, or so I thought. To her retreating back, I said sarcastically, "Just fine, thanks, and how are you, my lovely wife?" I was becoming quite skilled at sitting on the sofa, staring into space, and thinking about nothing in particular. I was doing just that when, a little after 1 o'clock, Maria came downstairs wearing her terry cloth robe with her hair up in a towel. She sat down on the other end of the sofa and turned towards me as she began combing out her long, wet hair. There was my wife, fresh from spending time with another man, sitting there calmly combing out her wet hair, as she'd done many times before in front of me. Visually, nothing was different. It was a familiar, even intimate scene that screamed of normalcy. However, beneath the comfortable and familiar exterior, the camouflage layer, everything had changed. The Maria I had married, loved, cared for, and promised my love, my life, and my loyalty to was gone. As if reading my thoughts, Maria said in a normal voice I hadn't heard in a while, "So Dave, here I am. The same woman who left here Friday evening. I feel better than I have in months," she winced as she hid a tangle of hair and then carefully worked it out. "Can we talk like adults, or are you still feeling sorry for yourself? She just had to hurt me." I got up from the sofa and started walking upstairs. Returning to bitch mode, Maria hissed, "Where are you going? We still need to talk, damn it." "Maria, we never talked. You and Flanagan dictated the terms of this situation. I wasn't okay with it on Friday, I'm not okay with it now, and I won't be okay with it tomorrow." She jumped to her feet and yelled up the stairs, "I asked you where you're going." I glared down at her. "Where I go is no longer your concern, dear wife. Just so you know, I'm moving my things into the guest room. No, you're not Dave Brown. You're my husband, and you won't disrespect me in my own home." "That's ironic, Maria. If you didn't have double standards, you wouldn't have any standards at all," I shouted over her. While moving my things into the empty guest room, Maria approached me, and in a halfway civil tone, she asked, "Did you make anything for lunch?" "What makes you think I've had an appetite since Friday night?" She looked away from me. "Didn't Flanagan feed you today?" I growled. An evil smile appeared on her face. "No, he didn't. He was too busy showing me how a real man behaves before he sent me home to my sweet little hubby," she said with a smirk. "So, there's not a single thing prepared to eat?" "Ha, no, dear. I've only been cooking for one since you left Friday." Suppressing an urge to scream, I added, "You want to eat? There's rat poison in the basement, Drano under the sink, and I'm sure there's still some cow manure piled up behind the garage." "Dave, you childish jerk," she said before she walked away. "Ladies and gentlemen, love has left the building," I yelled at her. We avoided each other for the rest of the day. I left my office only to eat a quick sandwich and to get a change of clothes from the spare bedroom. The futon finally wore me down, and I slept better Sunday night and woke up early. There was plenty of work to keep me busy until Maria left for her office. It amazed me even more that my wife was so cowardly that she only made coffee for herself. Oh, well, I thought, if you openly cheat on your husband, you'll surely neglect him when it comes to coffee etiquette that we've maintained for over 20 years. Then it got worse. A lot worse. Tossed out. It was nearly 2 o'clock on Monday afternoon when I heard a loud, pounding knock on the front door. It couldn't be mistaken for anything other than a cop knock. Prather County Sheriff's Department. "Open up," confirmed my suspicions. I recalled Robert's words Friday night, and through the glass storm door, I saw the papers on the deputy's clipboard, rustling in the cold, late January wind. Opening the door, I never got a chance to speak. "David Wayne Brown?" the deputy asked. "Yes, sir," I responded. "Please step outside and place your hands behind your back. I have a warrant for your arrest for domestic assault," he stated. The second deputy handcuffed me as the first deputy explained the charges. The complainant, Maria Elena Sandoval Brown, alleges that you assaulted her in this residence last Friday, and Brent Alton Flanagan witnessed this. They read me my rights, and as the second deputy was securing my home, I asked them, so, if your wife's boss came to your home, hugged your wife in front of you, and then proceeded to tell you they were going away to have fun all weekend, what would you two fine, upstanding gentlemen do? Both officers looked away, clearly embarrassed. Yes, gentlemen, you better hope Brent Flanagan never takes an interest in your wife, because between him and his influential father, they'll ruin both of you. As they were putting me in the police car, the second deputy said, "Look, man, we know this situation is messed up. We don't like it any more than you." The first deputy added, "Me? I'm afraid I'd have reacted even worse. Sorry, people like that don't deserve to live, but as you say, Flanagan has connections at the courthouse, and we're just hard-working cops like you." It's not personal or anything. I was formally charged at 9 the following morning, and there stood my wife in Flanagan. To her credit, she wouldn't even glance at me or her brother Robert, who represented me. When the judge asked me how I would plead to the charges, I replied emphatically, "Not guilty," which caused Flanagan to smile. Then, things took another turn for the worse. Before Robert was able to bail me out, they served me with a temporary restraining order. The hearing to review the restraining order would be held in 10 days, on the Friday after next. I was given 45 minutes on Wednesday morning to remove whatever belongings I would need to live elsewhere. Since I work from home, this meant trying to move the specialized plotter printer I use along with my high-end computer and all the related printers and hardware required for my job. I would also need to transfer my office phone, and at that moment, I had no place to live. Beatrice called some friends and family members, one of whom had access to a box truck. During the move, a cold, wind-blown, freezing rain began to fall. There was no way I could move the expensive equipment out of my home. We wrapped up the computer and monitors and loaded them, but the printers and filing cabinets got caught between the 45-minute time limit and the horrible weather. We asked the deputy for more time, and he went to speak to my wife, who sat in her car where the long driveway meets the county road. He shook his head no, which forced us to leave. Robert walked down and tried to explain the situation to Maria, and she said, "No, I want him gone. He scares me." She still couldn't look her brother in the eye. Without time to return the equipment to my home office, we had to leave the plotter printer, the other printers, and the filing cabinets, which contained all my business records, in the short hallway between the basement door and my office entrance. I spent the next 3 days trying to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. Robert had to withdraw from my case because the complainant was his sister. Robert referred me to one of his other partners, Acton Forsyth, a late-20s criminal lawyer who looked a lot like the Australian actor Paul Hogan in his younger days. Our strategy was simple. I would not accept a plea bargain for the domestic assault charge and would request a jury trial to prove my innocence. I would take the stand and testify about the extenuating circumstances and how I felt in that moment. Any reasonable jury would see the truth, especially when Flanagan and Maria testified and the facts surrounding my domestic assault were exposed. The biggest challenge, of course, was the restraining order, which we would try to have lifted, hopefully before the trial, but certainly after a not guilty verdict. Texas juries hold great power and often nullify the law when it's clear that common sense should prevail instead of blind obedience to the law as it is written or interpreted. As I suspected, Maria recorded the entire confrontation, where she told me to step back and lower my hand. The situation was complicated, but first, we had to overturn the restraining order, and Forsyth immediately began working on the upcoming hearing. He also appealed to the judge who issued the restraining order, requesting the removal of the rest of the tools necessary for me to perform my job. While I was hopeful, I was certainly not patient, and my anger was consuming me. Sandra insisted that I move into the small apartment attached to their garage, and truthfully, it was kind of cozy and well-suited for working and living in a small space. I had my office phone transferred to a new phone line there, but it took 3 days. I spent a lot of time on my cell phone making proactive calls to my clients. That weekend, I was still in a state of limbo, and I managed to do some work in my new, somewhat cozy place. By Sunday afternoon, it was clear that the stress, lack of food and sleep, and constant pressure had weakened my immune system. As January came to a close, I was getting one of the worst winter colds I had ever experienced. I started taking zinc and vitamin C, trying to minimize its impact. Forsyth called me Monday evening. He said that the judge assigned a deputy to take me to my home on Tuesday morning to determine what else I needed to take in order to work and live elsewhere. I could only take what I could carry, and Forsyth had arranged for a professional moving company to pick up my office equipment. All I had to do was put pre-printed labels on the items. The first stroke of luck was the assignment of Deputy Oliver Brown, no relation, to accompany me. He had just recovered from a severe, work-related car accident and was still undergoing physical therapy and rehabilitation. Assisting me was considered a light-duty assignment for him. When Deputy Brown and I arrived at my home, Maria was there, and she made a big fuss about being inconvenienced. She informed the deputy that she was now working mostly from home, but she complied with the court order. After a few minutes, Maria drove away and parked at the end of the driveway next to the county road, which allowed me to enter my own home legally. I could see that the deputy was clearly upset, and I made sure to comfort him and apologize for having to bring him out in this terrible, early February weather. When we entered my home, he didn't follow me around like he was supposed to. Instead, the deputy sat in one of the cozy family room chairs while I went around picking up more clothes and getting ready to label my equipment for the move. To say I was surprised would be a lie, because looking around, it was obvious that Maria and Flanagan were acting as if they lived in my house. The signs were everywhere. I found 3 of Maria's underwear, pretty and delicate underwear I'd never seen, casually tossed aside after she and Flanagan obviously used the kitchen table, the dining room table, and the sofa. In all the years we've been married, she's never left her underwear like this. It hurt even more. As I was sorting and packing more clothes, I saw clear evidence that Flanagan had been staying in my house, sleeping in my bed, and using anything he wanted, including my wife. I took several photos of the evidence. These included photos of his clothes in my closet, his toiletries on my bathroom counter, and even some of his medications on the bedside table, including something for male vitality. Next to the medication was a half-used bottle of special lubricant and a long purple toy with an interesting base. After quickly grabbing my clothes and a few personal items, I packed them all in a large duffel bag, which I left with the deputy. I then checked on my office equipment and discovered that the items were missing. I immediately informed the deputy, who began asking a lot of questions. It was as if I didn't remember where I had left my property. I showed him the photos I had taken when we ran out of time, which clearly showed where we left the equipment. Then, I showed Deputy Brown the empty space. Finally, the deputy seemed to understand, and he said, "They can't do that clearly. Deputy Brown has a future in investigation," I thought to myself. After searching the entire first floor, I decided to check the basement, and my first clue was a large, fresh scratch on one of the wooden basement steps. Sure enough, at the bottom of the stairs, I saw that the plotter printer was completely destroyed. Someone had thrown it downstairs, along with the other printers and a printer stand. I found both filing cabinets, damaged from their fall down the stairs. One was almost resting on the bottom steps. The second filing cabinet had hit the first one and was lying close to the water heater. This was the one I had turned off the weekend before. I went back upstairs, and when I informed Deputy Brown, he quickly inspected the destruction and went to the kitchen table to write his report of the incident. Returning to the basement, I examined the water heater more closely and discovered that the damaged, rusty pipe connection had been torn loose. It was clearly caused by the impact of the second filing cabinet, which broke the weakened connection. I noticed that the broken parts were still touching, and the break wasn't visible in the dim light. However, the ball valve was still in the closed position, just as I had left it. For the first time in my life, I did something out of anger. Call me foolish or desperate, but I saw an opportunity and took it. The smirks, the disrespect, the restraining order, the threats, and the images of them being intimate, and the reality of Maria rubbing it in my face. It all pushed me past my breaking point. I'm not avoiding responsibility, but I didn't wake up that morning and decide to do something evil. Anyway, I'm living with the consequences now, and it cannot be undone. With the sleeve of my jacket over my hand, I pushed the ball valve handle to slightly more than halfway open, as if the second filing cabinet had bumped into it. Immediately, I caught a whiff of natural gas. Wasting no time, I stepped away and took quick photos of the destroyed printers and broken filing cabinets. In two of the pictures, you can clearly see the valve in its partially open position. In one photo, you can also see the broken connection in the background, with the pipe still aligned. From the basement stairs, I glanced at the central heating unit located at the other end of the basement. I heard the roar of the fan and saw the faint glow of the natural gas flame through a small window as the unit fought against the February cold. Highly flammable natural gas slowly leaked into the basement, and fate took control as I stepped into the kitchen and closed the door behind me. To mask my nervousness, I showed anger at what my wife and her boyfriend had done to my valuable equipment. As he wrote, I looked at the closed basement door and silently thanked myself for sealing any drafts with weather stripping. If anyone discovered the gas leak, I could blame my severe head cold for not being able to smell it. If questioned about why I hadn't noticed the partially open gas valve, I could claim that I was too upset and distracted by the sight of my destroyed printers and broken filing cabinets to notice it. The deputy noticed my trembling hands and said sympathetically, "It's going to be okay. I'm sure the judge will hold them in contempt, and they've broken a couple of laws. I'm documenting everything in my report, Mr. Brown. I've got your back on this, sir." He smiled and pointed to his paperwork for emphasis. I nodded. "Yes, Deputy Brown, thank you. I appreciate it." As we drove away, Maria passed us on her way back to the house, but she didn't even look our way. The deputy noticed this and said, "She seems pretty distant. Doesn't she?" I simply nodded and stared out at the familiar landscape passing by. What have I done, I thought, as panic began to consume me. I can't undo this without admitting what I knew. The drive back to town felt long and silent. Later that afternoon, Acton Forsyth called me with some news. "I have good news. Judge Smith found your wife and Flanagan in contempt of court and has recommended that the district attorney charge them with criminal mischief and intentional destruction of private property worth over $1,500. Recommended? I chuckled. To be honest, I had the same reaction. It's not a coincidence that Smith is the judge assigned to this case. He and Flanagan Sassar used to be law partners before Senior got appointed to the State Resource Planning Commission. Smith ran for district judge. Acton explained. They'll probably plead guilty to something minor and have to pay for the damages. Politics can be frustrating. I exhaled in frustration. I'm having 2 jobs printed professionally, and they cost around $200 each. I want them to cover that cost as well. I'll make sure to mention it to the court clerk first thing tomorrow. And keep your receipts. We spent several minutes discussing the hearing regarding the temporary restraining order, which was scheduled for Friday. Forsyth told me that our chances of getting it overturned weren't great until after my trial for the domestic assault charges, which might not happen for a few months. Back in my apartment, I couldn't relax or even breathe properly. I had a chronic dry cough that wouldn't go away. Despite feeling unwell, I went to the main house to see Sandra, who gave me a brand new bottle of NyQuil PM. I always buy a couple of bottles at the beginning of winter, she told me. I sat propped up on the sofa in my apartment when Robert knocked on my door. He brought me a hot cup of tea wrapped in a towel. It was a nice warm drink that Sandra had made for me, and I drank it gratefully. Robert and I talked for a while, and I must have drifted off to sleep. I woke up to use the bathroom, and when I looked at the digital clock, it read 12:37. The gas leak, Maria, Flanagan, none of it crossed my mind as the effects of the medication-induced sleep still clung to me. Shattered, a loud noise jolted me awake, and despite the lingering effects of the tea and cold medicine, I struggled to get to my feet. It was Robert at the door again, and the expression on his face told me everything I needed to know. Something terrible had happened at my house. Fear and panic threatened to overwhelm me, and I stood unsteadily. "What happened?" I cried out, both angry and scared. Yes, those emotions were genuine. I knew I would be in trouble for whatever had occurred, and I hoped that I hadn't left any evidence or made any mistakes in covering my tracks. Guilt and regret would come later. He was stunned for a moment, and then I saw Sandra's tearful face behind him. "There's been an explosion at your house," he said hoarsely. The emotion in Robert's voice was evident. It's bad, man. Really bad." Sandra wrapped her arms tightly around him from behind. Still wearing my jeans from the previous day, I hastily threw on a warm shirt over my t-shirt. Shaking with fear and fever, it took some effort to put on my socks and boots. Sandra helped me put on my coat, and we quickly made our way to Robert's car. My mind was replaying everything I knew and had done. As we drove towards my house, I asked the obvious questions, but all I got in response was we don't know. There was a small glimmer of hope that maybe it wasn't as terrible as I had imagined. The important question was, what did I expect to happen when I decided to take action? It surprised me that I hadn't even considered the outcome. Was I acting out of anger? Was I fighting against a corrupt, biased situation that unfairly targeted me? Did any of it even matter anymore? Sandra interpreted my worried silence as concern for Maria. I stared out the rear window of Robert's BMW as we turned off the main road, and Sandra turned around in her seat to look at me sympathetically. She held my hand, being the caring sister-in-law and friend that she was. "We're here for you, Dave." That's what families do. We left the highway and drove onto County Road 14. Against the faint light of dawn, I could see smoke rising over the trees in the distance. Tears streamed down my face as we approached. A deputy stopped us about a quarter mile from the house, but allowed us to continue when I identified myself. The extent of the destruction shocked me. The roof, mostly intact, was now collapsed against the garage, and the walls had blown outward. The floors and interior walls were a jumbled mess of debris that filled the hole where the basement used to be. Clothes, papers, photographs, furniture pieces, bricks from the exterior, and wood were scattered everywhere. I picked up a loose piece of paper and saw that it was a cell phone bill from last October. Then, Sandra discovered a photo of Andy from her time at summer camp when she was about 10 years old. While there was a sudden fire with the explosion, very little had burned. The nearby volunteer fire department had arrived quickly and had turned off the utilities and put out the small, starting fires on the stage. They even found my safe, which we had hidden in a secret spot in the master bedroom closet behind a shoe rack. They discovered it in the middle of the driveway near the garage. My life, my wife, and everything I owned were shattered before me. Surprisingly, family memories were blowing around me in the growing breeze. Without warning, my knees gave out, and they helped me into the back of an ambulance where they gave me oxygen and checked my vital signs. The EMT warned me that with my high fever, low blood oxygen level, and wheezing lungs, I probably had pneumonia. It took about 15 minutes for me to recover enough to go back to the difficult task of facing what was in front of me. Sandra and Robert had their arms around me as we silently watched the firefighters find and cover the two bodies with yellow plastic sheets. A weak, cold winter sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden light on the scene. What was I feeling? Sadness, regret, anger, fear, loss? All of the above? It was hard to distinguish because these emotions manifest in similar ways that can be confusing. Perhaps this violent event had desensitized me and broke the part of me that could sort through and process emotions. Maybe some primal survival instinct had taken over to protect what remained of me. I started to feel sick and lightheaded, and I welcomed the darkness that overcame me and carried me away from that terrible scene. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed, breathing in cool, soothing air through an oxygen mask. My vital signs steadily appeared on the monitor, in rhythm with my beating heart. Andy sat in a chair nearby, looking upset, and I wondered why she wasn't in school. Then it hit me. Her mother was gone, and her father was. Why was I here? I must have gasped because Andy rushed to me, holding me and crying, "Oh, Daddy, please be okay. You're all we have, Daddy." Then I remembered our home, blown to pieces, debris scattered across the gentle slope we playfully called Brown's Mountain. I cried for the loss of my marriage and for the woman I loved with all my heart. I wept for the loss of my humanity and for the place and belongings we had called home and everything that word used to mean. Was I a killer? Was it self-defense? Maria and Brent didn't care about their spouses or me, but was this overly extreme? So many powerful conflicting emotions overwhelmed me. As Andy and I discussed the explosion and the events of the past weeks and months, she informed me that Drew was taking care of his mother's funeral arrangements. It saddened and disturbed me that my 20-year-old son had to handle such a grim task. I felt more guilt and sorrow for that than for my actions that had caused this chaos. Seemingly reading my mind, and I added, "Grandma and Robert are helping him. Aunt Sandra, Aunt Tina, and Uncle Art have people at the house trying to salvage what they can, especially the photos and your documents. There wasn't much fire, so it's mostly scattered and buried. They still won't let anyone enter the ruins of the house because the fire marshal, sheriff's department, and others are investigating the cause. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hands, which I noticed were just like Maria's, and continued, "There are probably 50 people out there helping, even in this cold." "So many people care about you." Daddy Andy left out her mother from that statement, even though we both knew Maria was loved by many, probably more than me. "Sweetheart," I said, "your mother was loved by many more people than I am. She was like Grandma in that way." Andy nodded, holding back more tears, and then she couldn't hold them anymore. "Oh, Daddy, why did she? What happened to my mommy?" The pain my daughter felt was absolute. I cried alongside her, for my daughter, for my wife, and for my tormented soul. Why did I do what I did? How could I ever forgive myself? Or live with this? Well, there I was. I had two clear options: confess my actions or live with them. At the very least, it was an unintentional crime or deliberate murder. With Flanagan Sr. pushing for it, who knows how they would seek punishment if I confessed. That realization made my decision. Maybe I was in complete denial and felt justified in my actions, but this is how I saw it. First, I didn't start this mess. If my wife was experiencing a mental breakdown due to hormones or a psychological issue, Flanagan shouldn't have taken advantage of her. Furthermore, being married and dating a married woman was wrong on every level. On one end of the spectrum, it was extremely immoral. On the other end, Flanagan was an officer of the court who would use his position and connections to suppress any opposition from his wife or me. He and his father had no problem manipulating the justice system with money, power, and influence. I reasoned that all I did was use the only means I had to rectify that injustice. Take away my wife, and I'll take away your namesake, Brent Flanagan Sr. Vigilante justice? Guerrilla warfare? I suppose that's what it was, and like guerrilla fighters everywhere, it was the only battle I could fight or afford. Now, I am paying for it and will continue to do so for the rest of my life. After giving it much thought, I would be lying if I didn't say I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. Was I deluding myself, even now? Perhaps, but I still carry immense guilt with me, and I strive every day to make amends for that guilt. Inquest: a severe case of double pneumonia and severe sinusitis kept me in the hospital for 4 more days. Acton Forsyth explained the obvious to me. They dropped the charges related to domestic assault because the complainant and 2 main witnesses were deceased. The same went for the restraining order. Forsyth also informed me about the upcoming Justice of the Peace Inquest hearing. Texas law mandates a Justice of the Peace Inquest in smaller counties, those without a medical examiner, when deaths of a suspicious, violent, or undetermined nature occur. The case was complex, and it took time to collect all the facts and summon the witnesses. As a result, the inquest was scheduled for over 2 weeks after I left the hospital. A jury of 6 individuals would assess the evidence and testimony, with the Justice of the Peace overseeing the proceedings. The district attorney would assist in questioning. AJP. Inquest is an investigative hearing, and my lawyer would not be present. He did inform me that having a jury did not sit well with old man Flanagan. He knew that if only the JP conducted the inquest, he could potentially use his political power, money, and influence to quickly send me to TDJC in Huntsville. Word got out about what Junior and Maria were doing in my marital bed in our family home. Every local politician decided to leave this politically tainted matter in the hands of 6 ordinary Texans, whose judgment and common sense had been relied upon countless times to make the right decision, regardless of political expediency. Even the slimmiest politician knows better than to touch a dirty situation with clean hands. Having 6 of my peers assessing the situation was the first fair opportunity I had since the night of the talk. The irony, of course, was that I was guilty of exactly what the old man wanted to convict me for, and he didn't care whether I was genuinely guilty or not. He believed that since I was in the basement that day, I must be guilty. Even the BATF from Dallas investigated, swabbing and testing the soil, but found no traces of explosives. In Deputy Brown's report, he mentioned that I had captured photos of the damage to my equipment, so it was no surprise that my pictures in his report, along with our testimonies, were subpoenaed for the hearing. On the first day of the inquest, they called me to testify at 10:42 and didn't finish until 12:28. I stuck to my story. The rules and procedures for presenting evidence are more informal than in a criminal trial. Only the person accused of a crime associated with the deaths being investigated can have legal representation. Most of what took place during the inquest was a common-sense examination of the events. It was informally formal, as some have described it. The justice of the peace, with assistance from the district attorney, questioned me and all the witnesses. No, I didn't smell natural gas because I had a terrible cold that later developed into pneumonia and sinusitis, leading to my hospitalization on the day of the explosion. My persistent cough and continued illness, even after 2 weeks, probably added to my credibility. No, I didn't notice the partially open position of the gas valve because I was upset and focused on the ruined tools that I depended on for my livelihood. Plus, with only one light at the top of the stairs, it was always dim down there. Enlargements of 4 of my 12 flash photographs clearly showed the valve's position and the damage to the filing cabinets. One of the photos captured black paint from the second filing cabinet they had thrown downstairs, which had transferred onto the water heater. In that same photo, what the fire investigators determined was the broken leaking connection revealed it was still intact if not completely connected and could easily be overlooked. The district attorney brought up the restraining order, which I addressed honestly. I admitted to grabbing my wife's wrist right after she hugged Brent Finnegan in our home. The JP allowed me to express my emotions and the desperation I was feeling. The stress, strain, my poor health, and the guilt pushed me over the edge while explaining how I felt watching my wife walk out the door and drive off with another man. I broke down in sincere tears. That seemed to calm down the questioning a bit. I never mentioned the strange things Maria said that evening during the talk, which she recorded. In my pre-inquest session with Forsyth, we discussed the suspicious nature of the recording. He indicated that support for the restraining order didn't mention the recording. However, Judge Smith likely listened to it but could not admit to having done so. So, he reasoned, I'd better not mention it because it officially didn't exist, and I didn't want to give it life. When asked about the photos I took of Brent's possessions in my home, which I got to examine while testifying, I admitted to taking them as evidence in my planned divorce, where I'd planned to cite adultery as grounds. Then, I innocently asked about the missing photos of the pills, ointment, and toy on the nightstand. The suddenly embarrassed justice of the peace took the district attorney into his chambers for a discussion. The resolution was that I got to retrieve those photos from the cloud, and the jury passed around my phone. It was apparent to the JP, and the jury what the DA had done. The most aggressive questioning concerned my work on the basement water heater. I described what I found on that Saturday, which matched the fire investigators' findings from the explosion's debris. I also told the inquest I shut off the supply valve. Did you make any attempt to repair the damage, Mr. Brown? The DA asked. No, I didn't, because I didn't have the parts or the expertise. So I made the water heater safe by turning off the gas supply. I was going to call a plumber the following week, I replied truthfully. You didn't think to tape the valve or secure it to prevent what happened? No, sir. I'm the only one who ever goes into the basement, and the valve is in no danger of being accidentally turned on. I've shut off gas or propane lines before and never had this issue, I answered. In hindsight, do you think it would have been better to secure it? It was a classic gotcha. No, sir. Not at all. I mean, the last thing I would have ever imagined happening is someone throwing my 2 heavy filing cabinets down the basement stairs, with the second one landing on the first one and bouncing 3 feet into the supply line. Sir. 2 of the jurors smiled. Undeterred, the DA continued. And you didn't think to call a plumber to fix this dangerous condition? I forced myself to be calm. No, sir. I was in jail Monday night and was out of the home from Tuesday onward. When you were required to leave your home, don't you think Mrs. Brown should have known about this problem? I looked at the justice of the peace and said, you have the temporary restraining order there. It's my understanding that contacting my wife in any manner would have violated that. Am I right, sir? After a brief examination of the TRO, the JP replied. That's right, Mr. Brown. Contacting your wife or Mr. Flanagan, even by text or email, would have violated that order. I turned to the district attorney and said, honestly, sir, it slipped my mind because my life was falling apart, beginning with being arrested. But that valve wasn't in any danger of being accidentally turned on, sir, except in an extreme case. Also, had I thought of it and contacted Maria, in her state of agitation, she would have had me arrested for violating the restraining order. That's how it went for much of that long session. It wasn't a trial, but it sure felt like one. I found out later that Robert testified to the state of my being the night of Maria's and Brent's date and my actions in the days leading up to the explosion. Sandra also testified. They even called Beatrice Sandoval to discuss her efforts to get Maria to release me from the temporary restraining order or not to try and make it permanent. The deputy who took me to my residence that last time, Oliver Brown, described the severe pain he was in and how he could not climb down the basement stairs or up to the second floor with me. He testified that he never came closer to the basement door than the kitchen table, which was 8 feet away, nor did he smell natural gas. When Tanya Barrett Flanagan testified, she strongly criticized the cheaters. Even though the DA tried to keep her testimony relevant, she described the threats made by her husband if she pursued a divorce, which exactly matched my testimony. Mrs. Barrett Flanagan confirmed that her husband left their marital home for the cheating couple's date weekend. Additionally, Brent's widow confirmed that he left their home when the restraining order compelled me to my residence. She said her husband freely admitted he was moving in with Maria to continue his affair with her. Though struck from the official record of inquest, Mrs. Barrett Flanagan uttered the unforgettable line, "I hope that jerk was fully involved in his new relationship when their love nest exploded." A prominent ear, nose, and throat specialist from Fort Worth testified concerning the loss of olfactory senses during severe colds and sinusitis. He said, in effect, that different people reacted in different ways. His testimony essentially stated, there was no way to prove that I could or could not smell the gas leak. There were many unanswered questions and indeterminable facts in this inquest. The primary reason was that 2 of the key witnesses were deceased. Also, the explosion completely destroyed the place of death, along with most of the specific physical evidence of what occurred. Based on the best evidence available, this is what the jury and the justice of the peace inquest determined. The blast occurred at 5:37 a.m., February 3rd in a semi-rural area of Prather County, Texas. The cause of the blast was the ignition of a natural gas air mixture in a residential basement, with the probable ignition source being the natural gas central heating unit located in that same space. The source of the natural gas was a broken supply line fed by a partially open inline ball valve, which the homeowner had previously shut off. The actual events or actions that caused the leak were indeterminable due to the subsequent blast and flash fire that caused near total destruction of the structure and its contents. Crucial to understanding when the leak started depended on knowing when the filing cabinet or other object pressed that valve to partially open. No one knew exactly when my property was thrown into the basement, because the 2 people who knew were deceased. Brent's cell phone showed him leaving our home at 9:37 that morning for Ann, 110 deposition at the courthouse, and Deputy Brown and I arrived at 10005. So, if the filing cabinets went down the basement stairs sometime that morning, causing the leak and the partially opened valve, the odor of natural gas might have been missed, especially with my diminished olfactory senses. Or, those items could have been in the basement for days with the broken connection posing no problem. This would mean the valve was turned on afterward, by an unknown person or persons, or by some unintentional means. There was simply no evidence to support any conclusion. Because of its speculative nature, the final inquest report did not contain that information. The final inquest report concluded, according to the fire investigator's report, the source of the ignition of the fuel-air mixture in the basement was the central heating unit located approximately 26 feet from the water heater. An examination of the failed water heater supply line showed both an installation error and corrosion introduced by an unknown water leak. Black paint from filing cabinet 2, filing cabinet 1 was gray showed on both the water heater body and the lower L section of the supply line. The impact of the filing cabinet likely caused the weakened joint to separate and, most likely, partially open the ball valve. The jury accepts the coroner's findings on the death of Brent Alton Flanagan WM/36 and Maria Elena Sandoval Brown HF/44. The autopsy determined that they died of a combination of standard penetrating and blunt trauma, along with blast lung and overpressurization force impacting their body's surface. The power of the blast ejected both from the residence, and they came to rest in the debris field. He was 63 NNW of the northwest corner of the home, and she was 84 NE of that same corner. Both wore remnants of garments consistent with sleeping, except for the deceased female, who still wore what the jury confirms is an adjustable pelvic harness of a type that allows attachment of certain specialized aid devices. Based on that last sentence, Tanya Barrett Flanagan's final statement, long struck from the official testimony, proved prescient, if somewhat inaccurate in detail. And no, the medical examiner's autopsy report didn't confirm finding the missing specialized aid device inside the person of Brent Flanagan Jr. Propriety, as well as his well-connected parentage, would preclude such a non-substantive mention. The official statement of conclusion was the jury finds this explosion to be an accident, the exact cause of which is indeterminable due to the lack of conclusive evidence. The bodies of the deceased are now released for final post-mortem disposition. That was it. In a nutshell, nobody knows precisely what happened to cause the leak or turn on the gas valve because there is no evidence. Even the circumstantial evidence is contradictory. So absent my confession, the case is closed. Afterward, Brent Flanagan SR was extremely angry at the jury's findings. The old man immediately posted a $150,000 reward for finding the perpetrator S of this wrongdoing, even though the formal inquest found no evidence of a crime. He says he knows I did it, but even he understands that knowing something and proving it are vastly different things. To the average cheated upon husband or wife, what I did probably seems like a no-brainer, given the golden opportunity to seek revenge upon the cheaters. Those same people would call me weak or foolish for feeling guilt and remorse over my actions. To those people, I would say they've never walked in my shoes. As bad as it feels to be betrayed, abused, threatened, and lied about, you can take comfort in knowing you are unequivocally a good person. You are the aggrieved, the one with moral standing. However, when you cross that unbreakable line and take a life or lives, you have joined their side from which there is no return. It's true that when you start on a quest for vengeance, dig 2 graves, or 3 in my case. Sadly, that realization occurred only in hindsight. Opining at a distance on another's situation is so clear and absolute in the abstract. However, as a rapper once succinctly stated, everybody want to be all tough, till they gotta do tough stuff even a low double-digit IQ. Moron gets it because when you consciously decide to start something that cannot be stopped, everything is going to change forever. It's a bit like choosing to be unfaithful, which brings us back full circle. The guilt has faded some because the human mind has a way of preserving itself. I still regret my actions, and I continually try to make up for them. By trying, I've become a better, more caring, giving, and lovable person in all aspects of my life. Now, there are grandchildren to dote over, a new and loving relationship to grow, and I'm closer than ever to my deceased wife's family. I'm also closer to my parents and relatives on that side of my life. When we remember Maria, it's the caring mother and loving woman I fell in love with and lived with for all those good years. In death, she is thoughtfully rehabilitated in our hearts and minds, and I have indeed forgiven her. My sincere forgiveness also extends to Brent Flanagan, Sr. and Jr. The only one I still struggle to forgive is David Wayne Brown. He's forever a work in progress. That struggle keeps me humble, contrite, and trying hard every single day. If anybody asks, yes, February can be challenging.